Getting this exhibition together. It is almost there. It's looking really wonderful upstairs, but they have requested that instead of, if any of you were here for Egypt, we kind of let you loose and you went all over the place. This time we're going to take you in bunches of 10, and we'll pulse in and walk from the beginning, whether we're going to go at the front or the back. I think we may have to come in through the back, and then kind of take a walk through, just to give you just an idea and a taste of what's there. So the free kind of, free guided kind of experience is not what you'll get, unfortunately, today, but you'll understand there's still objects that are being placed in their mounts as well. They're almost done, but there are some things, and there's a vacuuming and spot cleaning and all those kinds of things. So we'll get that coordinated at the end of this, but we are thrilled to be able, and we're going to do an in-conversation today with some Q&As maybe towards the end. And we're really, today is really, we have the opportunity of my two guests, who I'll introduce in just a sec, just to talk about the key messages for the exhibition. Sophia and Nikolai, just to know that these are the people that are representing the exhibition upstairs during the run. And they'll be meeting people and speaking with them, and messages around how you wish the exhibition to be talked about, any of those aspirations for the exhibition. We can get into those conversations as we go. But today it's key messages, maybe some talking about some of the highlights, unfortunately without visuals, but you'll get those connected through Ken and Ashley, who are really doing yeoman's work and getting you all prepped and ready to go. So I will start without further ado. First, to acknowledge that we're standing on the traditional lands of the Songhees and the Esquimalt First Nations, and that's an important thing for me to say. It comes from the heart. I kind of imagine this place before it was built upon, and think about those people and the ancestors that went before, and the generations that are coming next. It's important. When I then think about this exhibition, which is really a highlight of and a focus on the indigenous peoples and the many languages of the Maya people, I also wish to acknowledge them as well, and welcome as many who are coming for them to understand that. So that connection with indigeneity to me is really important. It's a connection with us, and it's a connection with them. So anyway, so we'll start. So I will start. Let's just start the ladies before gentlemen. So my great pleasure for you to meet an amazing woman. Her name is Sophia Peredes-Maury, and she's the director of the Ruta Maya Conservation Foundation. She has a BA in archaeology, so she's an archaeologist from the Faculty of Social Sciences at Universidad del Valle in Guatemala. And she has a master's degree in museum studies, so she's already got our vote, and a master's degree in Latin American and Caribbean studies from New York University. During her studies, she's worked in the education department at the American Museum of Natural History, and held internships in the conservation department at the Met and in the curatorial department at the Whitney. I had to add this. I mean, I took a lot out, Sophia, but I added things that I think they're going to really appreciate, right? So she developed a teacher's guide and teaching material that accompanies the exhibitions in the Hall of Mexico and Central America, and also supports the Department of Biodiversity Conservation with its programs in Bolivia and Mexico. She's also a certified volunteer guide. Are you still a volunteer guide? There you go. So these are my highlights. And in her professional field, she carried out research on the looting of archaeological sites in rural communities. She also has provided training courses in tourism and cultural and environmental education to community tourism committees in Bataan with different organizations. But now, and since 2007, she's been the executive director of La Ruta Maya Foundation, an organization whose mission is the recovery and repatriation of archaeological objects that have left the country in past decades, and promote the dissemination of cultural heritage through exhibitions and publications and educational activities. So welcome, Sophia. Dr. Nikolai Grube is the Chair of Anthropology of the Americas at the University of Bonn. And in addition to his teaching activities, Nikolai conducts various research projects in Mexico, Guatemala, and Belize, and has collaborated with numerous excavation projects in the Maya region, particularly in Caracol, Belize, Copan in Honduras, Homul, and Yasha. This is the code breaker, man. He speaks the whole language. In the southern state of Campeche in Mexico. Since 2009, he's led a major German Science Foundation-funded excavation project in the Maya city of Ixo. And in 2013, the Academy of Sciences and Arts of the North Rhine-Westphalia approved a long-term scientific project called Text Database and the Dictionary of the Classical Maya. So he is, in effect, one of our main expert code breakers. It's dedicated to the documentation of all Maya hieroglyphic inscriptions and the creation of a dictionary. Nikolai is a scientific consultant for several exhibitions on Maya and other civilizations in pre-Hispanic America, but most recently, we have had the pleasure to work with him on Maya, The Great Jaguar Rises. Nikolai Grube. So now that's it. I've thrown there's no more notes. There's no more here. So we're going to have a conversation, and I really, we will leave some time for you to kind of ask some burning questions that you may have, and they'll also be up in the galleries, kind of at different points, for you to kind of be there. If you're going to host and be there if you want to kind of ask questions. We won't have a lot of, we'll slowly kind of migrate our way through. We'll just play it by you when we get up there, but they're definitely there for you to have conversations individually if you so wish. So let's begin. Okay. There's water. He's on. Test. Is that on? Make sure everybody hears. I remember last year, I don't think we had mics. Kind of thing. So let's start with your aspirations for this exhibition here in Victoria for the next 8 months.
Well, because the scientific design of the exhibition was in part my idea. I will speak first, with your permission. It's a great honor for me to be here and to talk to you, and to also to transmit my enthusiasm for this ancient civilization. And when I say ancient civilization and talk about the Maya, many people believe and think that Maya civilization doesn't exist anymore, or that that Maya culture has totally disappeared. And one very important thing which we want to communicate in this exhibition is that Maya culture is still alive. After 3,000 years of history, Maya culture still exists and still is alive. It has changed. It's a different culture. It's not exactly the same as it was in the times before the arrival of the Europeans. But the Maya are still there. There are about 6 million people in Mexico, Guatemala, and Belize who speak Mayan languages. Languages which are closely connected to the written language of the ancestors, to the hieroglyphic inscriptions. And the stories which Maya parents tell their children are still based on mythology and are still based on stories which were told 1,000 years and 2,000 years ago. And so there is a lot of continuity in oral tradition, continuity in thinking, in religion, in ritual behavior. Most Maya today are, of course, Christians, but even under the Christian cover, they preserve a lot of the pre-Hispanic ideas. And the Maya are an example of a people who have managed to survive and to fight and to struggle against 500 years of colonialism. And this is something, I think this is probably the central message of this exhibition. But this exhibition will lead you through Maya history from the beginning, from the beginning all the way through the classic period, when Maya civilization flourished between 200 and approximately 800 or 900 AD. All the way through what we call the post-classic period, after the collapse of the big cities, into the colonial period, and ends in the present. And the first, when you enter the exhibition, you will first be overwhelmed by the first impression of an ancient Maya altar. Which is composed of 3 incense burners. Incense burners with which the Maya in ancient times have burned incense, pom as they call it, and to their gods. And the last point in the exhibition is a modern Maya altar. It's it's a very unspectacular altar, but it's an altar which the Maya today use to still offer to the gods. They offer candles, liquor, tobacco, and even animals to the gods in these sacred cities, in Maya cities, in Tikal, and in many other cities in Guatemala and in Mexico, because there's a strong Maya revival movement. So the exhibition will lead you from this opening room through the jungle. You will be introduced into the environment, into the natural environment, which is a great jungle. You will even hear the sounds of the jungle. It will then lead you into Maya agriculture, which is the next chapter. How did the Maya actually make their living? How did they live in the countryside, and how did they live in cities? What were Maya cities like? And Maya cities were, of course, places where religion took place, where we find temples, and where the gods were worshipped. This is the next part of the exhibition. And then you may wonder, how do we know about Maya gods, and how do we know about ancient Maya religion? And a lot of this information comes from the decipherment of ancient Maya writing. And there is a chapter, as a part of the exhibition, dedicated to Maya hieroglyphic writing and Maya calendar. And from then, you will walk through a Maya palace, through Maya architecture. And you will see how kings lived in these palaces, and all the accoutrements, how do you call it, the adornos, the ornaments, and all the dress and the jade which they carried, and the luxury in which the kings lived. And this whole section ends with another section where we will see how the Maya played the ball game. The ball game is a very important aspect. It's more than just a game. It's a communication with the gods. And it has deep religious underpinnings. And from the ball game, the ball game also is connected to the topic of warfare and conflict between cities. This will be addressed in the next part of the exhibition, where you will see panels and inscriptions and even arms and spear points, which were used in warfare, representations of captives. So you learn that Maya warfare was very important. And warfare eventually also was one of the driving forces behind the Maya collapse. great collapse, which mysteriously ended with this urban civilization. Hundreds of cities were abandoned after 800 AD. The whole process took about 100 years, but by 900 the majority of the cities was empty. And there were no kings anymore and no farmers anymore. The farmers also left, a little bit later than the kings, but they also abandoned the cities and the countryside. We know very little about this collapse, but we think that there was a political collapse, and then there was also the drought, climate change, and many of the problems which we face today were also contributing factors to the abandonment of these cities. But Maya civilization did not end with the abandonment of the cities. The Maya still existed as a people. I will just finish. It's a long.
No, you're going through.
The Maya.
Leave them hanging.
No, I don't leave them hanging. And so the Maya continued as a people, and Maya culture saw a transformation after the downfall of the cities, a transformation into a more, well, if I say democratic culture, this is too much, but a more equal culture, where more people had access to luxury items, where trade was more important, and kingship was not as important. This is the period, the 500 years before the arrival of the Spaniards, between the abandonment of the cities and before the arrival of the Spaniards, we see this transformation in Maya society. And of course, by 1511, the Maya met for the first time Europeans. Actually, it was a little bit earlier, Columbus. He encountered a trading canoe with Mayas in the Gulf of Honduras, and he was astonished that the Maya had these bags with beans in them, and they liked these beans very much. They were very precious for them. It turned out that these beans were cacao beans. So there was a trading canoe which Columbus encountered in 1502. This was the first encounter between Mayas and Europeans. And the story of the conquest of the Maya begins in 1511, and it took a long time, more than 200 years, until the last Maya kingdom was conquered. But even then, the Maya continued to live very much, even though they didn't maintain the ancient political structure. They became Christians, but they continued to live in their villages, in their pueblos, preserving a lot of their culture until present day. Now, this is a story which we want to tell in this exhibition. So I'm very sorry that I've taken so much time.
I'm going to just grab that for 2 seconds.
One of the things that I'd like Sophia to talk about is, again, bringing it back full circle to the work that she's doing with the foundation, which is also an expression of contemporary Maya and what's happening here in Guatemala now and within Central America. So there'll be a note at the beginning. We don't know where it's going to be placed yet. I haven't seen it.
It seems like it's not going to be placed at the beginning.
Oh.
There's a little label thing.
Okay, so you will have a note on provenance that I want you to memorize. And every time that you talk to people, I want you to be able to kind of talk about where the objects come from. Because I think all of you are probably now beginning to think about stereotypes, misconceptions, things that people may think about Maya civilization, and maybe they're incorrect. But one of them is around provenance, that everything's been looted or stolen, or the pre-Columbian art is really in the news and pop culture and those kinds of things. So I think ultimately this Sophia's foundation is doing some wonderful, wonderful work and continues to do and fight the good fight. And if you can speak a little bit to that within a contemporary context.
Yes, of course. Thank you, and I'm happy to be here with you.
And I want to a little bit answer of the previous question about what will happen in the next 8 months. And the very important thing for me is that this exhibition, as I have seen it, is very different from others I have been at, because this one is interpretive. It's very interesting for me to see how the museum and the design of the exhibition is open to interpretation. The labels are very accessible to the public, and the idea of the light and the sounds and even the way things are portrayed, it gives us the perfect idea of the Maya culture and how we as human beings can also understand antiquity, because we can compare with our own lives. The Mayas were as any other person and people in the world. They ate beautiful, wonderful food. You will see a video about food and cooking also. They had their own religious events. They dressed up and they decorated themselves, they ornamented themselves. So we can compare with our own lives what we see there. And a very important factor is that most of the objects that are traveling to this exhibition they come from extraordinary collections, really. For the first time in many years, the best objects from the National Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology are traveling, as well as some of the monuments and objects from La Ruta Maya Foundation. And we are happy to bring them here because those are outstanding objects. In the case of the objects of the National Museum, most of the collection, has archaeological provenance. That means that the objects were found in controlled archaeological excavations, and that they were found with studies and analysis and the proper ways of retrieving an object. So there is a story behind each one of the objects. That is thanks to context that we are able to know who was in that burial or what happened with that object, if it was part of an offering in a tomb or an offering underneath the stairway of a temple, or if it was an offering in a cave, because that still happens all today. So it's very important to have provenance. In the case of certain objects, especially monuments that we will find there, they are going to have a small note just next to the label, and those are the objects from La Ruta Maya Foundation. And these objects, unfortunately, do not have archaeological provenance. They were found by looting, by destruction of looting, or other ways of obtaining an object. It is very important for us to understand that in the Guatemalan territory, as well as the rest of Mesoamerica, there is not 1 square meter that you are not going to find something. So the reality of the country is, yes, there is looting and there is destruction, a lot, especially in the northern parts of the country, the Petén, where we are more familiar to see cities made of limestone and pyramids and all this. But there is also other ways, and this fortuitous finding by local population because of construction of highways, construction of infrastructure, the houses, domestic repairs, agriculture, intensive or extensive agriculture, and even sports, diving, hiking, and there's another caving, are 3 of these sports in which the population can find objects that are pre-Columbian. So, in the case of La Ruta Maya, all the objects that we see in the exhibition, everything that is archaeological belongs to the state. It is the property of the state of Guatemala. And even if it's in private hands, we have them duly registered in the National Register of Cultural Property. So La Ruta Maya has a custody of objects that we have recovered from abroad by repatriation, voluntary donations, especially from the United States, of old collections that they have delivered to a cultural institution, in this case La Ruta Maya, with the modality that it can go back to the region of origin. So we accept donations as any other museum in the United States, but with that modality of bringing them back. That is one thing, and the second is that we have received also collections in Guatemala, already registered by the National Property Register, and in these cases we have documented all the objects that have come to us. What does this mean? It means that even if an object was found, however it was found, and it lost the largest percentage of the information we obtained when we know the context, is who was buried there, if it was associated with other objects, if it was in a funerary context, what were the contents of those vessels, because sometimes we find vessels and the first thing when people find them is washing them. And there was no chance of doing any of the tests inside to see if there were samples of food or beverages inside, and that is very sad, as well as the associations of other objects. For example, weaving materials, or if the tomb was that of a painter, if they were conch shells as ink pots inside, or what was the purpose of the object. We lost that when there is no archaeological context, but an object can have also a voice. There are other kinds of analysis that we can use in order to at least get the closest we can to the purpose of an object and its use. For example, we have epigraphy, the reading of hieroglyphic writing, as Nikolai and other colleagues do. They translate and they give a meaning to a monument as part of a piece of the big puzzle of history. So writing is basic for Maya culture to understand, as Nikolai was telling, not only the text of narrative, but also dates. And we can go back to big events, as we are going to see in the stela, with big commemorations, the names of the kings and the rulers and nobility, the names of cities, that at the same time archaeologists are doing research on and locating these cities in a big map. I am sure you all have seen the National Geographic documentary on LiDAR. That was a big thing for most of the people, and to be able to see the large amount of structures in a large territory about the Maya. So we have that situation. We also have studies in style, studies in the iconography, or the study of the figures and the meaning of and symbols of what appears painted there. There is also a neutron activation analysis of the clay of the ceramics that can go as far as knowing where the pottery shop was located. Very incredible. This is the part of the Maya survey project from the Smithsonian Institution. They have done sampling of clay in several collections. Ruta Maya has been sampled, as well as the National Museum of Archaeology, excavations in Mexico with the Proyecto Tlalocan, and many other collections and museums in the United States also. They put the clay in nuclear reactors, and they break down all the chemical profile of that clay, and then they compare with all the samples they have taken. And from archaeological excavations and collections with no provenance at the same time. And that profile, that chemical profile, is like a fingerprint. that you can tell from where that pot was coming from. So, on provenance material, lost part of it, of the information, but that doesn't mean it cannot be studied and compared with other material. And now that we know that not everything is looted by destruction, but also found, gives us another very interesting situation that happens in Mesoamerica today, especially in Mexico and Guatemala, and it's the reuse of cultural heritage. What do we mean with this? About reuse, it turns out that as the Maya culture survived through time until modern times, and we can see the ritual still going on, the certain foods that are still being cooked, the ingredients that are still being eaten and have some kind of symbolism also. We also find that the beliefs on certain deities and certain special places are still sacred today. For example, for the ancient Maya, doing it simply, the universe was divided in 3 large levels, or many more, but 3 large. It's the heaven, the world of the living, and the underworld. That was not the same hell. No, it was not like that. It was another kind of vision of the underworld. There were deities also in that realm, and it still is believed today in many ways. So the entrance of the underworld, for example, were the bodies of water, lakes and lagoons, caves, in some cases the craters of volcanoes and fumarolas. They were part of that entrance to the underworld. So there are rituals that are still going on today that are taking place in caves, and in other cases, other sacred geography, such as the crossing of 4 roads, el cruce de 4 caminos. That is a very important geographical factor that is still very sacred. The bosques encantados are the forests, enchanted forests, and many deities still inhabit the mountains and the sacred hills. Many of the communities in the highlands of Guatemala and Mexico still believe that the animal companions that are born with you when you are a baby, they still live in the hills around the community. And those are called the nahuales. The ancient Maya had the white before, but people still believe they have spirit animal companions, and they still live in these sacred hills around the communities. So having this sacred geography and having these rites and beliefs makes them also vulnerable the archaeological objects. Why? Because they can still be found by local people, and they are placed on top of the altars of the Ajquijab. The Ajquijab, or Ajquij for singular, or Ajquijab plural, are the Maya spiritual leaders. They do not like to be called shamans, but for your, it makes it easier for you, it will be like saying a shaman, but they don't like that word, obviously, and this Ajquij or Ajquijab. They still have their ceremonial altars, but when you get close to one of them, you will see small sculptures made of basalt stone that are clearly pre-Columbian. You will see beads of jade and quartz that are clearly pre-Columbian, but they are being used for divination today. You can see blades made of obsidian, also pre-Columbian, and they are still being used on top of the altars. And when I went and did some research with them, I asked them, I was doing surface survey around Lake Atitlan in highland Guatemala, And I said, oh, and I noticed, of course, all these pre-Columbian little objects on top of the altars. And I said, where did you find this? Of course, I'm in the archaeological world. I say, there must be some kind of source around, on archaeological sites. And he said, oh, those are left for us by the Lord of Thunder. When it rains, he drops the things in the field so we can find them and put them in the altar. Okay, so I said, no. There is a mound that is washed